Diego just signed papers putting himself another $200,000 into debt, and he did it grinning like he'd won something. His bank account didn't shrink, his net worth just went up. Meanwhile, three doors down, Curtis hasn't owed a soul a dollar in 9 years, checks his perfect credit score like it's a lottery ticket, and is quietly, slowly going broke standing still. My name is Nick, and I've spent an embarrassing amount of my life studying why the guy cheerfully drowning in loans keeps pulling ahead of the debt-free guy who did everything right. Here's the part nobody says out loud. Diego didn't get rich in spite of the debt. He got rich because of it. He figured out something Curtis never will, that there are two completely different kinds of debt, and only one of them is quietly trying to ruin you. Today, I'm showing you the 6 ways regular people use the good kind to build serious wealth. Let's get into it. So let's clear something up before anybody in the comments loses their mind. When I say debt makes people rich, I'm not talking about your credit card. I'm not talking about the 28% interest you're paying on a couch you bought in 2022. That kind of debt is a wealth-eating parasite, and if you've got it, everything else in this video comes after you kill it. What I'm talking about is a completely different animal. Here's the cleanest way to see the difference. Bad debt buys things that lose value and drain your account every month. Good debt buys things that either climb in value or pay you to own them. That's the whole line. And here's the stat that flipped my assumptions when I first found it. You'd expect rich people to be drowning in debt, leveraged up to the eyeballs. It's the opposite. According to Federal Reserve data, the wealthiest households carry far less debt relative to what they own, around 12% for the top sliver, versus well over 60% for a typical middle-class family. The rich borrow less proportionally and get richer doing it. Because it was never about how much they borrowed, it was about what they aimed it at. Curtis never learned that distinction. He heard debt is bad once, probably from a guy on the radio, and built an entire identity around avoiding it. Diego heard the exact same advice and asked one better question. Which kind? Hold on to that question, because it ends up being worth roughly 8 times Curtis's net worth. So let's walk through exactly what Diego aimed his debt at, starting with the oldest leverage play in the book. The first way is real estate, and it's first for a reason. It's the most accessible serious leverage a normal person can actually get their hands on. Here's the trick. When Diego buys a rental, he doesn't pay for the whole thing, he puts 20% down and the bank covers the rest. But, and this is the part that breaks people's brains, he keeps 100% of the appreciation. Put numbers on it. The property costs $250,000. Diego puts down $50,000. It rises a modest 5% in a year, $12,500. If he'd paid all cash, that's a 5% return. Fine, boring, but he didn't pay cash. He put in $50,000, so $12,500 is a 25% return. Same house, same year, same market, he multiplied his return by 5 using the bank's money. And that's before the tenant shows up and starts paying down his mortgage every month with their own paycheck. Fast forward 10 years on that single property. It's worth around $340,000, the loan's down to about $166,000, and Diego's equity, his slice, is roughly $180,000. His original $50,000 turned into $180,000, largely on somebody else's income. If you've ever wondered why landlords always look a little too relaxed, that's the reason. Now the hard part, because leverage is a knife that cuts both directions and I don't want anyone emailing me from bankruptcy court. That same multiplier runs in reverse. If the house drops 20% instead of rising, Diego's entire $50,000 down payment is gone. Wiped, and that's not a hypothetical, it's a documentary, it's called 2008. When millions of over-leveraged owners watched their equity evaporate while the bank came knocking anyway. Leverage does not care about your feelings, but bought right and held through the rough patches, it's a machine. Diego can even refinance, pull his original $50,000 back out tax-free, a loan is an income, and run it again with the same money. Investors have a name for that loop. They call it buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. Diego buys a beat-up place cheap, fixes it up until it's worth more, rents it out. then refinances against the new higher value and pulls his original cash right back out to go again. Same 50 grand, recycled into a second house, then a third. He's not saving up for each property, he's reusing one down payment on a loop. Meanwhile, Curtis is saving up to buy one rental outright in cash sometime around his 65th birthday. By then, Diego owns 6 of them. Which brings us to the second way, quietly the most powerful on the list, using debt to buy a business. And let me put the scary part first this time, so you can't accuse me of burying it. Businesses fail, a lot of them, roughly half within 5 years and 2/3 within 10. Okay, now that the warning label's on the bottle. Here's why this is still the mechanism that mints more everyday millionaires than almost anything else. Most people think you have to start a business from scratch, eat ramen for 4 years, and pray. You don't. You can buy one that already works, already has customers, already turns a profit, mostly with borrowed money. That's what Inspa Loan is for. The Small Business Administration backs loans that let a regular person buy a cash-flowing business with as little as 10% down. Picture a boring, unglamorous winner, a laundromat, a plumbing outfit, a pest control route that earns $200,000 a year and sells for $800,000. Diego doesn't need $800,000, he needs about $80,000. He borrows the rest, and then the business's own profit pays back the loan. Sit with that because it's the whole game. The asset pays for itself. Diego puts in $80,000 and the thing he bought generates the money that clears the debt he bought it with. Loan gone, he owns an $800,000 cash machine outright for a tenth of the sticker. This, scaled up with billions and much better suits, is exactly what private equity does. Leverage buyout is just a fancy phrase for borrow most of the money, buy the company, let the company pay off its own purchase. They call it a strategy. It's the same hustle. Buying an existing, profitable business tilts the odds your way versus starting from zero. You're buying proven cash flow instead of a hope and a logo. But tilts the odds isn't guarantees, and if that laundromat's revenue dries up, the loan payment shows up anyway every month with the patience of a serial killer. The line Curtis never crossed was simple. He thought you needed money to own a business. For Diego, the business was how you got the money. The third way is where it gets a little sneaky, and it's the one the truly wealthy lean on hardest, borrowing against assets instead of selling them. It has a name that sounds like a heavy metal album, Buy, Borrow, Die, Here's How It Works, and it's simpler than it sounds. Diego's been running the real estate playbook and investing alongside it for years. So say his portfolio is now worth $5 million, and he originally put in $1 million. If he sells to get cash, he owes capital gains tax on the $4 million in profit, a bill somewhere around $950,000. Almost $1 million gone just for touching his own money. So he doesn't sell, he walks into the bank and says, I've got $5 million in stock. Lend against it. The bank hands him a loan at say 6% using the portfolio as collateral. On $3 million borrowed, that's $180,000 a year in interest. Line those two numbers up. $950,000 in tax if he sells versus $180,000 in interest if he borrows. And the kicker. His $5 million stays fully invested and growing while he spends the borrowed cash. He uses his wealth without selling it, without triggering the tax, without stepping out of the market. Borrowed money isn't income, so there's no tax on it at all. Then the morbid last step, the die part. When Diego passes, his heirs inherit the stock, and thanks to a rule called the step up in basis, that $4 million in gains he never paid tax on simply vanishes. Legally, the slate wipes clean, the estate settles the loan, the family keeps the rest, and the taxman never got his slice. This isn't a loophole somebody found in a dusty basement. It's how people like Larry Ellison and Elon Musk operate, pledging billions in shares as collateral instead of selling. Should you, with a normal portfolio, go lever up on margin this afternoon? Please no, this one has teeth. If the market crashes and your collateral drops, you get a margin call. the bank demanding its money back at the exact worst moment, forcing you to sell into the crash, which is the financial equivalent of being asked to bail water while someone drills fresh holes in the boat. But the principle underneath is worth stealing. To the rich, selling is a last resort, borrowing is the first move. The fourth way your parents probably did by accident without ever understanding it, and it might be the most quietly beautiful on the list, borrowing cheap to invest at a higher return and letting inflation finish the job for free. The logic: if Diego's mortgage is locked at 3% and the stock market historically returns around 10, then every dollar he doesn't throw at paying the mortgage off early and invests instead earns him the gap. Borrow at 3, earn at 10. That 7-point spread is basically free money on paper. It's why financially sophisticated people are weirdly in no hurry to kill a low-interest mortgage. Curtis hurled every spare dollar at his 3% loan because, in his words, debt bad. Diego kept the cheap loan and invested the difference, and across 30 years that one choice is worth a small fortune. It only works, mind you, if you actually stay invested through the ugly years instead of panic selling at the bottom. The spread pays the patient and finds the twitchy. But here's the part almost nobody appreciates. And it might be my favorite fact in all of personal finance: inflation quietly pays off your debt for you. Diego borrows a fixed amount today, his mortgage payment is locked, the same number every month for 30 years. But inflation makes every dollar worth a little less as time rolls on. His salary rises, rents rise, the price of a sandwich rises, and that mortgage payment just sits there. Frozen, getting easier to cover every single year. He's repaying tomorrow's expensive loan with money that keeps getting cheaper. Picture a $2,000 monthly payment. In year one, it takes a real bite out of his paycheck. But 30 years later, after decades of raises and rising prices, that same $2,000 is what he leaves as a tip at a nice dinner. The number on the bill never moved, the world around it inflated, and the debt shrank in real terms every year he did absolutely nothing. The Federal Reserve has studied this outright. Inflation quietly transfers wealth from lenders to borrowers. The lender loses, the fixed-rate borrower wins. And the single biggest winner from the whole mechanism? The U.S. government, perched on tens of trillions of dollars in fixed-rate debt that inflation melts down like an ice sculpture at a wedding. If it's good enough for the Treasury, it's worth a second look. The fifth way is the least exciting to say out loud and one of the most valuable in practice: using debt the tax code actually rewards you for carrying. Here's a rule that quietly runs the whole system. The interest on your credit card and your car loan, not deductible. You eat that cost alone, in the dark. The interest on a business loan or an investment property, deductible, the government chips in. Same act, borrow money, pay interest, but the code treats consumer debt like a vice and productive debt like a virtue. So when you're paying interest on that financed truck, you swallow the whole bill. When Diego pays interest on his rental, he writes it off, which quietly makes his real borrowing costs lower than the rate printed on the page. Then there's the crown jewel, depreciation. On that rental, the tax code lets Diego deduct a chunk of the building's value every year as if it's wearing out, even though the place is, in reality, going up in value. On a $275,000 building, that's around $10,000 a year in deductions he claims without spending a real dollar. A phantom expense that shields real income. Run the actual numbers on it. If Diego's in a 30% tax bracket and between deductible interest and depreciation he's got $20,000 in write-offs, that's $6,000 the government simply doesn't collect from him every single year for owning an asset that's climbing in value the whole time. Curtis, paying interest on his car, gets exactly none of that. He writes the check and moves on. Diego's asset appreciates, and on paper the government thinks he's losing money and pats him on the head for it. Recent law made it sharper. As of the 2025 legislation, businesses can once again write off 100% of certain purchases in the first year, a provision called bonus depreciation that had been fading out and got fully restored. Pair it with a strategy called cost segregation, And serious real estate investors front load enormous deductions, sometimes zeroing out their taxable income the very year they buy. Quick honest footnote, because I'm not your accountant, tax law shifts constantly, so anything this specific is worth confirming is still true when you're actually doing it, not just when you're watching a video about it. And notice the pattern under all 6 of these. The system isn't hiding any of it. It's written down publicly in the tax code. It just quietly rewards the person who borrows to build something over the person who borrows to buy something. And that gap right there is the whole reason I built a school community. None of this is secret. It's just scattered across tax code and finance jargon and gatekept behind people who'd rather sell you a $1,900 course. Inside our school community, we break these exact mechanisms into plain English and real steps next to people already running them instead of just talking about them. It's linked below. It's built for anyone tired of watching this stuff from the sidelines, and the first step in costs you basically nothing. If any of this is landing, come see the rest. Which brings us finally to the 6th way, less a tactic than the idea sitting under the other 5. Every one of those plays is really the same move. Use other people's money to control an asset you couldn't buy outright, and let the asset do the heavy lifting. Real estate, businesses, portfolios, cheap arbitrage, tax advantage loans, strip the details and it's one motion. Borrow, aim it at something that grows or pays, let time compound the gap. And it stretches past the 5 I've named. A degree that genuinely lifts your income can be good debt. Big if the income actually shows up. $40,000 borrowed for a nursing credential that adds $30,000 a year to your paycheck is one of the best trades on this entire list. $40,000 borrowed for a degree that lands you right back at your old job is just a very expensive participation trophy. Then there's seller financing, where the person selling a business lets you pay them over time straight out of the profits. Same principle, no bank in the room. A franchise loan, a credit line against equipment that earns more than it costs. Different costume every time, one idea underneath. So here's the 1-sentence test I promised you at the very start. The whole video compressed into a question you can ask standing in the checkout line. Is this borrowed money buying me an asset or a liability? Is it about to put money into my pocket or pull it out? That's the entire framework. The boat you've been eyeing is a liability. A duplex is an asset. That watch is a liability. A profitable business is an asset. Rate and terms matter, but that first question decides almost everything. And I have to be straight with you, because this is exactly where these videos start lying. You can do all of this correctly and still lose. We love the people who leverage their way to a fortune and quietly forget the ones who leverage their way into a crater. For every Diego, there's a shadow Diego who bought at the wrong time, borrowed too much, hit a bad stretch, and got flattened. The market's long-term winners are rarer than you'd think. Research shows more than half of individual stocks actually lose money over their entire lifetime. Even the man who built the whole debt is dumb gospel Curtis lives by built it after personally going bankrupt from real estate leverage in his 20s. He's not wrong about the danger. He's describing a different appetite for risk than the one that builds wealth fast. So how do you stay on Diego's side of the ledger and off the wreckage side? 4 conditions, and a good debt play needs all 4. 1, the spread has to be real. The thing you buy has to reasonably out-earn the loan. 2, it has to be an appreciating or cash-flowing asset, not a depreciating toy wearing an investment costume. 3, the leverage has to be survivable with enough cushion that a bad year bends you instead of snapping you. And 4, you have to keep making the payments through the rough patches, because the rough patches always come, and the loan, unlike you, never gets tired, never sleeps in, and never once feels bad about it. Miss any one of the 4, and good debt quietly turns back into the kind that's trying to kill you. And look, Curtis isn't a fool. He got real things right. He never paid a cent of credit card interest. He saved every month. He sleeps fine at night. If you're carrying high-interest consumer debt right now, Curtis's whole cautious gospel is precisely the medicine you need first, before a single idea in this video. But he mistook avoiding debt for building wealth, and those are not the same project. That 30,000 he kept so safe in savings, a decade later it had crept up to about 34,000, and after inflation took its cut, it actually bought less than the day he first parked it. He guarded that money so carefully it quietly shrank in his hands. Diego took the same instinct, aimed it at assets instead, and turned one $50,000 down payment into $180,000 in equity, then did it 5 more times. Same street, same paycheck, same starting line. One of them retired at 50 with 6 properties and a business that runs without him. The other has a paid-off house, a flawless credit score, and a quiet, nagging sense that he did everything right and somehow still got lapped. The difference was never courage or luck or income. Debt is just a tool. In the wrong hands, it's a trap that eats people alive. In the right hands, aimed at the right thing, it's the closest thing to a cheat code ordinary people are actually allowed to use. If you want to learn to aim it like Diego instead of fearing it like Curtis, that's exactly what we're building together inside our school community. I'll see you in the next one.